Then if you want to be on the Baldoni side, you say, well, she's an absolute traitor. She backstabbed him with no evidence.
Let me ask you something before we even get started. What does it feel like to build something from nothing? To spend years, pouring every single piece of yourself into your work, into your reputation, into the kind of man you want the world to see you as. And then wake up one morning to find out that the very people standing next to you were quietly, carefully, deliberately trying to burn it all down? That's not a hypothetical. That's not a movie plot. That's what Justin Baldoni says happened to him. And now, he's done being quiet about it. Today, we are going deep into one of the most jaw-dropping, emotionally gut-punching stories to come out of Hollywood in years. We're talking about a man who thought he was surrounded by allies, and allegedly discovered he was surrounded by architects of his own destruction. We're talking about names you know. Ryan Reynolds, Liz Plank, and a PR war so calculated, so precise, that people in the industry are still whispering about it in rooms they think no one else is listening to. Stay with me, because this story, it doesn't just get complicated, it gets unbelievable. And by the time we're done, I promise you, you will never look at Hollywood friendships the same way again. Here's what you need to understand about Justin Baldoni before anything else. This is not some random Hollywood guy who stumbled into the spotlight. This is a man who built his entire identity around authenticity, around vulnerability, around being different from the traditional leading man. You know him from Jane the Virgin, the show that gave him global recognition, that made women fall in love with Rafael Solano, that charming, emotionally layered character who kept everyone guessing whether he was a hero or a villain, and somehow managed to be both and neither at the same time. But off camera, Justin was doing something even more interesting. He was using his platform to talk about men's mental health at a time when that wasn't cool yet. He was running a media company, Wayfarer Studios, built on the philosophy that storytelling could heal people. He gave TED Talks that made grown men cry in their cars. He wrote books. He showed up as a father, as a husband, as a human being who genuinely seemed to give a damn about something other than box office numbers and Instagram likes.
Liz Plank is a nobody. But back in 2021, she was friends with Ryan and Blake. Even though she was Justin Baldoni's friend and his podcast co-host, she decided to come out in support of Blake and drop Justin Baldoni and to leave the podcast and then go out on her own.
And so when he got the opportunity to direct It Ends With Us, the film adaptation of Colleen Hoover's beloved, emotionally shattering novel about surviving domestic abuse, people thought, of course, who better than him? Who better than the man who spent years talking about how men need to do better, be better, understand better? It felt like destiny. And that's exactly why what came next hit so many people so hard. Because when you believe in someone's goodness, when you've watched them stand at a podium and talk about emotional accountability with tears in their eyes, and then you start hearing whispers that maybe, just maybe, it was all a performance, that feeling of betrayal isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about what you chose to believe. And nobody wants to feel like a fool. Let's go back. Because context is everything here, and I need you to understand the full picture. It Ends With Us was one of the most anticipated film adaptations in recent memory.
Not only did Liz Plank post this photo in 2019 thanking Ryan freaking Reynolds, he also posted her book to his story. She also was unwelcome to Wrexham.
Ryan and I had questions.
So we went to the only logical place for answers. A woman.
Hi, my name is Liz Plank. In the first episode of the show, Rob said that he went to Ryan for movie money.
Colleen Hoover's fan base, affectionately known as Book Talk, is not a fandom you take lightly. These are passionate, deeply invested readers who know every chapter, every emotional beat, every line of dialogue. They had opinions about casting. They had opinions about the director. They had opinions about whether Hollywood could possibly do justice to a story that meant so much to so many people who had lived through what that book describes. Blake Lively was cast as the lead. And that's where everything starts to get complicated. Now, Blake Lively is not just an actress. She is a brand. She is a cultural presence. She is also married to Ryan Reynolds, one of the most beloved, most savvy, most carefully image-managed stars in the entire entertainment industry. Ryan Reynolds, the guy who turned a superhero movie nobody believed in into a billion-dollar franchise.
Ryan texts Liz Plank and says, "I'm a little baffled by Mr. Baldoni. I would love some guidance at some point." She says, "Rats. I tried to warn Blank on the red flags, but I was hoping he had gotten better."
Ryan Reynolds, who bought and sold a gin company and a phone company and a Welsh football club, and made it all look effortless and charming and completely off the cuff, even though everyone in business knows none of it was any of those things. He is a machine dressed in a dad joke. And Liz Plank, if you don't know her, she's a journalist, an author, a feminist media figure who had been publicly connected to Justin's world, involved in conversations about the film and its messaging around gender, abuse, and accountability. On the surface, this all sounds like a dream team. A film about surviving abuse, directed by a male feminist filmmaker, starring one of Hollywood's most powerful women, with the support of her equally powerful husband and a prominent women's advocate in the conversation. It sounds perfect, which is exactly why the cracks, when they started appearing, were so jarring. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come in a press release. It didn't come from a lawyer or a leak. It came the way most Hollywood disasters begin, slowly, quietly, in the background, in the comments sections, in the DMs, in the way a story starts to shift before anyone can quite put their finger on why. During the promotional rollout for It Ends With Us, people started noticing something. The energy was off. The usual synchronized press tour warmth, that manufactured but usually convincing sense that everyone loves each other and this movie is a family, just wasn't there. There were interviews where Blake seemed to be steering the narrative in a particular direction. There were moments where Justin appeared to be on a slightly different page. Small things, subtle things, the kind of things that only show up when you go back and watch with fresh eyes. And then the lawsuit started. Justin Baldoni filed legal claims that alleged a sophisticated, coordinated campaign was waged against him. A campaign designed to destroy his public image, derail his career, and position him as the villain in a story he believed he was trying to tell with integrity. The legal documents described communications, strategies, alleged plans between publicists and figures connected to the Reynolds lively sphere. Conversations that, if true, painted a picture not of organic public outrage, but of manufactured public outrage. Carefully placed, carefully timed, the word that kept coming up in those documents, and in Justin's own account, was sabotage. Not a misunderstanding, not a creative difference, not the normal tension that exists on every film set in the history of cinema. Sabotage.
Liz Plank is a liar. I do feel that she has not been completely honest, but I do believe Liz was involved in it from the get-go. I think she knew what was going on.
Intentional, calculated, personal, and the alleged architects? Ryan Reynolds and Liz Plank. The moment that name, Ryan Reynolds, appeared in the same sentence as a deliberate smear campaign, the internet didn't just talk about it. The internet erupted. Because Ryan Reynolds is not the kind of celebrity people are prepared to see in that role. He's the nice one. He's the funny one. He's the one who makes self-deprecating jokes about himself and seems genuinely happy and humble and safe. The idea that he might be wielding his cultural capital as a weapon against someone, that broke something in people's perception that they didn't even know was fragile. One fan, responding to early reports, put it simply, "I feel like I just found out Santa Claus was running a protection racket." And honestly, that's not far off from the collective emotional whiplash the public was experiencing. But here's what I need you to sit with, really sit with, before we go any further. Justin Baldoni did not make these claims quietly. He did not whisper them through anonymous sources. He put them in legal filings. He attached his name to them. He said, in effect, "I know what was done to me. I know who did it, and I am willing to stand in a courtroom and say so." That's either the bravest thing a person can do in Hollywood, or the most desperate. Maybe it's both. Because here's the question that nobody has been able to answer yet. The question that has been living rent-free in the minds of everyone who has been following this story since the very beginning. If Justin Baldoni had all of this information, all of these alleged communications, all of this alleged evidence of a coordinated campaign against him, why did it take this long for us to hear it? And more importantly, what else are we still not hearing? Because here's the thing about Hollywood sabotage stories. The version that reaches the public, it's never the full version. It's the version someone wanted you to hear. And when the people allegedly involved have the kind of PR infrastructure that Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively have access to, when their team reportedly includes some of the most aggressive, most experienced reputation management professionals in the business, you have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Is what you've heard the truth? Or is it just the part of the truth that survived the edit? We're just getting started. And I promise you, Part 2 is where the fans lose their minds, where the leaks start coming out, where the sides get drawn, and where this story stops being about a movie.
The same address, 888 7th Avenue, 4th floor in New York. And look who is the agent. Eric Binder. This is the same agent as Van Zandt Inc.
And becomes about something much, much bigger. Don't you dare go anywhere. You know that moment when a story stops being something you're watching from a distance and starts being something you're inside of? That's what happened when the details of Justin Baldoni's allegations hit the internet. It wasn't a slow burn. It wasn't a gradual realization. It was like someone dropped a lit match into a room that had been quietly filling with gas for months. 1 second, silence. The next second, fire everywhere. Comment sections turning into courtrooms. Fan accounts becoming investigative journalists. People who had never heard of Justin Baldoni 2 weeks prior were suddenly dissecting his TED Talks frame by frame, cross-referencing timelines, pulling up old interviews, and making 17-minute video essays with their front cameras and ring lights, and the kind of righteous energy that only comes from feeling like you've just uncovered something real. And right in the middle of all of it, completely unprepared for the scale of what was coming, was the book talk community. The very people who loved It Ends With Us more than anyone. The very people who had cried over Colleen Hoover's words, who had made that book a cultural phenomenon, who had been so excited to see it on screen. They were now being asked to choose a side. And choosing a side in this particular war meant something. Because on one side, you had Justin Baldoni, the director, the man making the allegations, the one saying he'd been set up, smeared, and discarded. And on the other side, you had Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, beloved untouchable, practically American royalty by this point. And Liz Plank, a feminist media figure with serious credibility and a devoted following of her own. This wasn't just celebrity gossip anymore. This had identity politics baked into it. This had gender and power and media literacy all tangled together. This was the kind of story that made people feel things about themselves, about what they believed, about who they trusted, about how easily public perception could be shaped without anyone realizing it was being shaped. The internet did not handle this gracefully. But honestly, did any of us expect it to? Within hours of the legal filings becoming public, and specifically once the more detailed allegations started circulating, social media became a genuinely different place. On X, formerly Twitter, the hashtags multiplied faster than anyone could track them. Hashtag Justice for Baldoni was trending alongside hashtag Protect Blake Lively within the same news cycle. Two completely opposite narratives, living side by side, each fed by a passionate, vocal, absolutely convinced segment of the internet. The book talk community, and I want to spend a moment here because they deserve it, found themselves in a genuinely painful position. These were readers who had connected to It Ends With Us on a deeply personal level. Many of them had shared their own stories of abuse and survival in the context of loving that book. The film's release had already been emotionally complicated for them, with rumblings about tension on set surfacing even before the premiere. And now, with full-blown legal warfare erupting between the director and the film's star and her husband, people who had been celebrating this story of survival were being pulled into a different kind of drama entirely. One TikTok creator with nearly 2 million followers posted a video that got shared hundreds of thousands of times. She sat in her car, no ring light, no filter, just raw frustration in her eyes, and said, "I read that book because it helped me process something real that happened to me. And now I can't even talk about the movie without getting into a debate about Ryan Reynolds. I didn't sign up for this." That video hit differently, because it reminded everyone, even the people deep in the weeds of the celebrity drama, that there were real people on the edges of this story who had personal stakes that had nothing to do with Hollywood politics. But the empathy had a short shelf life, because the leaks started coming out. And once they did, empathy became a luxury most people felt they couldn't afford. Here's where things go from dramatic to explosive.
There's an allegation that they set up a sham lawsuit, they being Blake Lively's team, where they sued this publicist to get the phone to release these text messages to the LA Times.
Justin Baldoni's legal team didn't just make allegations in vague, broad strokes. They pointed to specific communications, specific strategies, a specific infrastructure of reputation management that they alleged was deployed against him with surgical precision. The documents referenced text messages, meetings, a crisis PR strategy that allegedly included planting narratives with journalists, coaching responses, and this is the part that made people's jaws physically drop, allegedly coordinating the timing of negative stories about Baldoni to coincide with key promotional moments for the film. Think about what that means for a second. If the allegations are accurate,
It's Blake Lively. How can you twist something like this? She is the one who sued him. She didn't have to sue him.
The negative press about Justin Baldoni wasn't organic public reaction to his behavior. It was scheduled. It was produced. Like a content calendar, except instead of promotional posts, the content being scheduled was the systematic dismantling of a man's reputation. The name attached to the alleged coordination? A publicist deeply connected to the Reynolds lively world, and woven through the narrative, appearing in conversations, allegedly consulted on strategy, connected to the machinery of the alleged campaign, was Liz Plank. Now, Liz Plank's involvement is something I need to address carefully, because it is genuinely one of the most complicated threads in this entire story. Liz Plank is not a random figure. She is a journalist who has written extensively about masculinity, gender dynamics, and the ways men can and should evolve their behavior. She co-hosted content with Justin Baldoni. She was part of the orbit of conversations around the film's themes. On the surface, she appeared to be an ally, someone aligned with the film's message, someone who understood what Justin claimed to be trying to do. Which is exactly why her alleged involvement in what Baldoni describes as a coordinated effort against him hit so many people as a particular kind of betrayal. Not just personal, ideological. Because if the person who wrote about authentic masculinity was allegedly helping to weaponize fake narratives about a man's character, what does that say about the authenticity of the whole movement? What does that say about who these conversations are actually for? One commentator online put it bluntly: if the feminist media apparatus can be deployed as a tool to destroy someone when it's politically convenient, then we have to ask, was it ever really about the values? Or was it always just about the power? That comment got 40,000 likes and sparked a sub-debate that lasted for days. I'm not telling you that comment is right. I'm not telling you it's wrong. What I'm telling you is that people felt it deeply. And that feeling, that sense of ideological whiplash, spread through the conversation like a second fire, separate from but connected to the first. Let's talk about Ryan Reynolds, because his alleged role in this is the part of the story that the internet was least prepared for, and, arguably, the part that changed the temperature of the entire conversation. Ryan Reynolds has spent years building one of the most carefully, brilliantly constructed public personas in modern celebrity culture. He is charming. He is self-aware in a way that feels disarming. His humor is the kind that makes you feel like he's in on the joke with you, not above it. He turned Deadpool into a billion-dollar franchise partly on the strength of his own personality. His marketing campaigns for Aviation Gin and Mint Mobile became case studies in authentic brand building. The word authentic is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this story, isn't it? Because what Justin Baldoni's legal documents alleged, and what started circulating in detailed breakdowns across YouTube, Reddit, and X, was that Ryan Reynolds was not a passive bystander in what happened to Baldoni. That his team, his infrastructure, his reach was allegedly part of the mechanism used to amplify negative narratives and shut down Baldoni's ability to defend himself publicly. The specific allegation that went the most viral, and when I say viral,
so what this was a very sophisticated legal strategy to insulate the big firm from getting sued for the tens of millions of dollars for what could have been argued was the, if you read Judge Lyman's order, missteps by her.
I mean, it was in every group chat, every comment section, every podcast episode for 2 straight weeks, was the claim that communications existed suggesting a coordinated effort to ensure that any journalist or media outlet considering giving Baldoni a sympathetic platform would face consequences. Not legal consequences. Social consequences, professional consequences, the kind of quiet, invisible pressure that Hollywood runs on but never openly acknowledges. One entertainment journalist, speaking anonymously, which tells you everything, described it as the kind of thing where you don't get a phone call telling you not to run the story. You just suddenly notice that the publicists you need for your next 10 cover stories stop returning your emails. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's how power works in any industry. But hearing it described in the context of Ryan Reynolds, funny, self-deprecating, beloved Ryan Reynolds, created a dissonance that people genuinely struggled to process. The memes came first because they always do. But underneath the memes, the comments told a different story. People were genuinely unsettled. Not angry yet, that came later. But unsettled in that specific way that happens when a piece of your worldview quietly rearranges itself without your permission. One fan wrote, and I think this is worth sitting with, I've defended Ryan Reynolds in arguments for years. I told people they were being cynical when they said his nice guy thing was calculated. I feel like such an idiot right now. And another responded, "You're not an idiot. You believed what you were given. That's the whole point." By week 2 of the story dominating the cultural conversation, the sides had fully crystallized. Team Baldoni argued that what he was describing was a textbook example of how powerful people in Hollywood silence inconvenient voices. That a man had tried to make a film with integrity, had clashed with a star who had significantly more institutional power than he did, and had been systematically punished for it. They pointed to the legal documents as evidence of premeditation. They argued that if you flipped the genders, if a powerful male star had allegedly weaponized PR machinery against a less powerful female director, the reaction would have been immediate, unanimous, and devastating. That argument landed with a significant portion of the internet, particularly with people who had already been skeptical of the cult of personality around Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, or who had their own experiences with watching institutions close ranks around the more powerful party in a conflict. Team Lively Reynolds argued the opposite. They said Justin Baldoni had created a difficult, uncomfortable environment on set. That Blake Lively had raised legitimate concerns and was being publicly crucified for it by a man who couldn't handle accountability. They argued that the framing of the legal documents was itself a PR strategy, a way to flood the zone with allegations so overwhelming that the public couldn't process them and defaulted to both sidesing a situation that wasn't actually ambiguous. And Team Liz Plank, and yes, this became its own sub-debate, centered largely on what it meant for feminist media figures to be named in legal documents in this context, and whether that naming was itself an attempt to intimidate women who speak publicly about gender dynamics from involving themselves in situations where powerful men were facing criticism. 3 separate fires, all burning at the same time, all interconnected, all feeding each other. The comment sections on every video about this story became the most unlikely mixture of legal analysis, personal trauma processing, media criticism, pop culture nostalgia, and raw, unfiltered emotional reaction you have ever seen in one place. It was chaos. It was fascinating. It was, in its own deeply strange way, completely human. And then, just when people thought they had found their footing, just when the camps had settled into their positions and the debate had found its rhythm, something else came out. Something that nobody, not the journalists, not the fan accounts, not the lawyers, not the publicists, had seen coming. Because here's the thing about a PR war. When it's being fought between professionals, people who do this for a living, people who understand exactly how information flows and where it lands and what it does to public perception, both sides have leverage. Both sides have material. Both sides have things they'd rather the other side never released. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, one side decides they have nothing left to lose. Justin Baldoni's team released something in Part 3 that didn't just change the conversation. It detonated it. We're talking about a moment so unexpected, so deeply personal, so raw, that even people who had been firmly in the other camp stopped and went quiet. Just for a moment. But sometimes a moment is enough to change everything. There's a specific kind of silence that falls over the internet when something genuinely unexpected happens. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of disinterest, the silence of collective breath holding. The kind where millions of people are all staring at the same thing at the same time, and nobody quite knows what to say first, because whatever they say will be inadequate, and they know it. And so for just a few seconds, just a few precious, rare seconds in the loudest media environment in human history, everyone goes quiet. That silence happened in this story, and I need to tell you exactly what caused it. But before I do, I need you to understand something about where Justin Baldoni was emotionally at this point in the story. Because this isn't just a legal drama. This isn't just a Hollywood power struggle with interesting characters and entertaining plot twists. This is a human being, a father, a husband, a man who had built his entire public identity around the idea that vulnerability is strength, who was watching everything he had built being systematically dismantled in real time, in public, while the people he believed had orchestrated it were being celebrated. Think about what that does to a person. Think about what it feels like to wake up every morning and see your name attached to narratives you say are false, knowing that millions of people are reading those narratives and forming opinions about who you are as a man, as a professional, as a human being, and knowing that the machinery producing those narratives is powerful enough that your denials look defensive instead of truthful. That's not just professionally devastating. That's psychologically brutal. And it matters. It matters because it's the emotional context inside which the twist we're about to discuss was born. Before the twist, before the detonation, There was a period, quiet and largely undocumented in the public conversation because it happened between the headlines, where Justin Baldoni simply endured. People close to him described watching a man try to hold himself together while everything around him came apart. His production company, Wayfarer Studios, which he had spent years building into something genuinely meaningful, was suddenly radioactive in certain Hollywood circles. Projects that had been in conversation went cold. Meetings that had been scheduled quietly disappeared from calendars. The kind of institutional ghosting that doesn't require a single confrontational conversation. It just happens, and you're supposed to understand why, and you're supposed to accept it. His TED Talk, the one about men and vulnerability, the one that had been viewed tens of millions of times, the one that had made people genuinely reconsider how they thought about masculinity, was suddenly being recontextualized. People who had never watched it were now sharing clips with captions designed to make his sincerity look like performance. The very content he had created to open conversations about authentic manhood was being used as evidence of inauthenticity. The cruelty of that specific reversal is hard to overstate. His wife, Emily Baldoni, stayed largely out of the public conversation, a choice that was both understandable and, in its own way, quietly devastating to watch, because it illustrated just how total the isolation of a situation like this can be. You can't speak without making it worse. Not because they didn't care, because they couldn't afford to, because alignment with a radioactive name in Hollywood is its own form of professional self-destruction. And so the people who might have spoken up, who might have added their voices to his, made the calculation that most people make when institutional power is arrayed against someone they know. They stayed quiet. And that silence, from people who knew, is arguably the most damning part of the entire story. Not damning of Justin Baldoni, damning of the system that made their silence feel rational. One industry insider, again speaking without attribution, said something that has stayed with me since I first read it. Everyone I've talked to privately says the same thing about Justin, but nobody will say it publicly. That tells you everything you need to know about how this town works, and who really has the power in it. And then, the thing nobody saw coming, Justin Baldoni's legal team released a set of communications that had allegedly been obtained as part of the discovery process. And while legal document releases happen regularly in high-profile cases, and while most of them are dense, procedural, and difficult for the average person to emotionally connect with, these were different. Because these weren't just strategic memos or PR planning documents. These were personal, the communications, which spread across the internet within hours of their release, discussed in real time on live streams, broken down sentence by sentence in YouTube videos, screenshot and reshared across every platform simultaneously, allegedly showed conversations in which Justin Baldoni wasn't just being managed as a PR problem. He was being mocked, not criticized, not professionally assessed. Mocked, his values ridiculed, his public advocacy for men's mental health described, in the alleged communications, in terms that suggested the people involved viewed it not as genuine, but as marketable, a costume he wore, a brand he sold, something to be used against him when the time came because its inauthenticity could be demonstrated. And woven through those communications, in ways that the documents made difficult to dismiss as coincidental, were names and references that tied the conversation directly to the Reynolds' lively orbit. The moment this became clear, the moment people reading through the documents connected the threads and understood what they were looking at, the internet produced that silence I described at the beginning. Because this wasn't about a movie anymore. This was about whether the things we believe about people, the goodness we project onto them, the values we celebrate in them, the parasocial trust we extend to them, can be weaponized against someone who actually believes those things genuinely. This was about whether sincerity is a vulnerability in a world where everyone around you is playing a longer, colder game. One fan, posting in a thread that accumulated tens of thousands of responses within hours, wrote, "I don't care which side is right anymore. I care that we live in a world where caring about something real can be used as a weapon against you. That's the part that's breaking my heart." That comment was shared more widely than almost anything else written about this story, because it named something that people had been feeling, but hadn't been able to articulate. The twist wasn't just about Justin Baldoni. It was about all of us and what we choose to believe, and what it costs us when we're wrong, and what it costs the people we're wrong about. Now I need to spend some real time on Liz Plank, because her role in this story, and the public reaction to her alleged involvement, is one of the most genuinely complicated chapters in the entire saga, and I refuse to flatten it into something simpler than it actually is. Liz Plank built her career on ideas, on the proposition that gender dynamics could be examined honestly, that men could be held to higher standards without being demonized, that the conversation about masculinity needed more nuance and more compassion than it was typically given. She wrote a book called For the Love of Men that was widely praised for approaching the subject of modern masculinity with genuine empathy rather than judgment. She and Justin Baldoni had occupied overlapping spaces in the public conversation. They had appeared in similar contexts, discussed similar themes, been celebrated by overlapping audiences. On the surface, they were ideological neighbors, people working toward related goals through different methods, which is why the alleged communications involving her name hit that specific audience. The audience that cared about those conversations, that had read those books, that had shared those TED Talks, with the force of something almost grief-like. Because if the allegations are accurate, and I want to be precise here because these are allegations and the legal process exists for a reason, then what they suggest is not just personal betrayal. They suggest that the language of feminist advocacy, of gender accountability, of masculine growth, language that real people have used to process real pain in their real lives, was allegedly being deployed strategically as ammunition in a very human, very ugly power struggle between people who are supposed to be beyond that. The reaction split in a way that was almost geometrically precise. One group said, Liz Plank deserves the same scrutiny we would apply to any powerful person alleged to have participated in a coordinated smear campaign, regardless of gender or ideological alignment. Accountability is not selective. Another group said, the naming of Liz Plank in this context is itself a tactic, a way to use the legal process to discredit feminist voices, to make women who speak about male behavior think twice before doing so, to poison the well of gender discourse by associating it with bad faith. Both of those arguments are coherent. Both of them are being made by intelligent, good faith people. And the fact that both of them can exist simultaneously is precisely why this story refuses to resolve into something comfortable and clean. Liz Plank herself responded, and her response was careful, measured, and notably short on specific denials. She spoke about the difficulty of being named in legal proceedings. She did not, in her public statements, address the specific communications that had been referenced in the documents. And that restraint, that very deliberate, very lawyerly restraint, was itself something people read very carefully. The public explosion, the moment when the story stopped being a contained celebrity drama and became something genuinely cultural, happened not in a single moment, but in a cascade. First, the mainstream media, which had been cautiously circling the story, finally fully committed. Front page, think pieces, op-eds from people with credentials who had opinions about what this case revealed about Hollywood power structures, about PR ethics, about the weaponization of gender politics, about defamation law and its relationship to public figures. Then the podcast universe ignited. Every major pop culture podcast, every true crime adjacent show, every celebrity commentary platform spent at least one full episode on the story. The cumulative audience of those episodes numbered in the tens of millions within a single week. Then came the parasocial reckoning. This is the part that I find most genuinely fascinating and most genuinely troubling about what this story revealed. Ryan Reynolds' brand, that meticulously constructed, enormously valuable, deeply personal brand built on the perception of authentic likability, began showing visible cracks for the first time in his career. Not catastrophic ones, not the kind that end careers overnight, but the kind that don't fully heal. The kind that change the way people watch you, the way they receive your jokes, the way they assess your sincerity going forward. His social media posts, which had always been received with universal warmth, were suddenly attracting a different kind of comment. Not hate exactly, but scrutiny. The kind of scrutiny that says, we're watching differently now. One post, completely unrelated to the Baldoni situation, just regular content, received thousands of comments referencing the case. People who had been his most enthusiastic supporters were publicly processing a complicated mixture of disappointment, defensiveness, and reluctant reassessment. The brand damage, industry analysts noted, was measurable. Not in any single metric, but in the texture of the public conversation around him, which had fundamentally shifted in a way that no amount of charming Instagram content was going to fully reverse. Blake Lively, for her part, went quiet. The carefully managed, consistently present social media persona went still. The The promotional content stopped. The carefully curated lifestyle posts disappeared. And that silence, from someone whose public presence had been so consistent, so controlled, so deliberate, was paradoxically louder than anything she could have posted. Because in a story about alleged PR manipulation, silence is itself a PR choice. And everyone knew it. The book talk community. Remember them, the ones who loved the book, the ones who had personal stakes in this story before it became a power struggle, found themselves in the most painful position of all. Because the film they had loved, the story that had meant something real to them, was now so thoroughly contaminated by the off-screen drama that many of them said they couldn't engage with it anymore. Couldn't watch the trailer without feeling something complicated. Couldn't recommend it to friends without a 20-minute caveat. One creator put it simply, in a video that made me genuinely stop and think. Colleen Hoover wrote a book about how the people who are supposed to protect you can hurt you in ways you don't see coming. And then the movie adaptation became a real-life example of that same thing. I don't know whether to call that irony or tragedy. Maybe both. Maybe both. And then came the moment I promised you. The moment that produced that specific silence. Justin Baldoni gave an interview. Not a prepared statement. Not a legal filing. An actual interview on camera, sitting still looking directly into the lens. And he talked about his son. He talked about what it means to try to model something for a child. To try to show a boy what it looks like to be a man who is honest, who is vulnerable, who takes accountability, who believes that strength and gentleness can coexist. And he talked about watching his son encounter the public version of his father. The version being constructed in real time by forces he alleged were working against him, and not knowing how to explain it. He didn't cry. He was very still. And somehow that stillness was more devastating than tears would have been. The clip circulated without commentary for a long time. Just the clip, shared silently thousands of times. Because there are moments in these public stories where the human being at the center of it suddenly becomes undeniable. Where all of the legal language and the PR strategy and the ideological debate falls away, and you are left with just a person, in pain, trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. That was one of those moments. And even the people who had been most vocal in their skepticism of Justin Baldoni's account went quiet. Not because they changed their minds necessarily, but because even people who believe someone is wrong can recognize when that person is suffering. And recognizing suffering, allowing yourself to be moved by it even when you're uncertain about the facts, is one of the most fundamentally human things we can do. The silence lasted about 48 hours. And then part 4 happened. Because here's what nobody tells you about the aftermath of a public explosion like this. The explosion is not the end. The explosion is just the moment when everything that was hidden becomes visible. What comes after the explosion, the settling of the debris, the assessment of the damage, the long, quiet reckoning with what has been lost and what, if anything, can be recovered, that's where the real story lives. Justin Baldoni is still standing. Barely, some would say. But standing. Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively are still standing. Their foundation cracked but not collapsed. Liz Plank is still standing. Quieter than before, but standing. And the question that has no clean answer, that will follow every single person in this story for years, is what standing means when the ground beneath you has permanently shifted. What does it cost to win a war like this? What does it cost to lose one? And when the fighting is over and the lawyers go home and the comment sections move on to the next disaster, who exactly are any of these people now? Part 4. The aftermath. The silence. And the question I'm going to ask you directly. The one I genuinely want your answer to. Don't go anywhere. We're almost at the end. And the end, I promise you, is worth staying for. You know what nobody talks about when these stories finally exhaust themselves? The morning after. Not the morning after the explosion. Not the morning after the viral moment or the trending hashtag or the think piece that everyone shared and half of everyone actually read. I mean the real morning after. The one that comes weeks later, maybe months later, when the noise has died down enough that the people at the center of the story have to actually look at what's left. Have to walk through the rooms of their lives and take inventory of what the storm took with it. That morning is quiet in a way that the internet never gets to see. Because the internet has already moved on. There's a new story, a new explosion, a new set of sides to choose and opinions to perform. The algorithm doesn't wait for anyone to finish grieving. It just keeps moving, and it expects you to keep moving with it, and if you can't keep up, if you need a moment to stand still in the wreckage and just breathe, well, that's your problem. The feed doesn't pause for personal reckonings. But we're going to pause. Right now. For just a few minutes. Because this story deserves that. Because the people inside it, all of them, even the ones you're angry at, even the ones you've written off, even the ones whose alleged actions made your stomach turn, are human beings who are living inside consequences that don't end when the trending topic does. And because I think you deserve to hear the full ending. Not the clean one. Not the satisfying one where justice is clearly served and the villain is clearly punished, and the hero walks away vindicated and whole. The real one. The messy, unresolved, permanently complicated real one. Let's talk about what actually changed. And what didn't. Justin Baldoni's legal case did not resolve quickly. These things never do. The machinery of litigation is slow and expensive and grinding, and it operates on a timeline that has absolutely no relationship to the pace of public attention. The depositions, the document exchanges, the procedural motions, all of it continued long after the public had metabolized the story and moved on to something else. But the professional aftermath was more immediate, and more complicated than either his supporters or his detractors had predicted. On one hand, there was a genuine wave of industry solidarity that emerged in the weeks following the release of the communications. Not loud, not public, because this is Hollywood, and public solidarity with someone in legal conflict is a calculated risk that most people aren't willing to take. But real. Producers who had gone quiet reached back out. Conversations that had been frozen began to thaw. People who had been watching from a careful distance started to recalibrate. Quietly, the way people in powerful industries recalibrate when they sense that the tide might be shifting. Wayfarer Studios, the production company Justin had built, did not collapse. It contracted. There's no honest way to describe it otherwise. Projects stalled. Partnerships that had been in development quietly dissolved. The company that had been on an upward trajectory found itself in a period of painful consolidation. But it survived. And the people who stayed, the ones who chose to remain connected to Justin and his vision during the worst of it, did so with a clarity of purpose that, by most accounts, actually strengthened the culture of what remained. There is something to be said for the people who stay. Wayfarer continued developing content. Justin continued working. The version of him that emerged from the worst months of this was, by his own account, both diminished and clarified. Diminished in the sense that things had been taken from him that he would not fully recover. Clarified in the sense that the experience had stripped away any remaining illusions about the nature of the industry he had chosen to work in. He gave a second interview, shorter than the first, more guarded, but with moments of striking honesty, in which he said something that I want you to really hear. I went into this believing that if you told the truth clearly enough, people would see it. I still believe the truth matters. I just understand now that it doesn't always matter on your timeline. Sometimes it matters on a timeline you don't get to control. Sit with that for a second, because that's not bitterness. That's not defeat. That's someone who went through something genuinely terrible and came out the other side with a more honest relationship with reality. And there is a kind of hard-won dignity in that which I think deserves acknowledgement, regardless of where you stand on the broader dispute. Now, Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. I'm going to be honest with you here, because this channel has always been about honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Their careers did not end. Their marriage did not visibly fracture. Their institutional power did not evaporate. They remained, by any conventional measure, two of the most successful and influential people in the entertainment industry. But something changed. The texture changed. Ryan Reynolds' next major public appearance, a promotional event for one of his business ventures, the kind of carefully orchestrated, charm-forward media moment that had always landed perfectly before, was received differently. The warmth was still there from a significant portion of his audience. But there was a new layer of commentary underneath it, a running subtext that hadn't existed before. People watching with a different quality of attention. The parasocial contract, that unspoken agreement between a celebrity and their audience that says I'll perform authenticity and you'll receive it as real, had developed a visible seam. And once you can see the seam, you can't unsee it. Blake Lively's public reemergence was even more carefully managed. Her return to social media was gradual, strategic, and notably stripped of the effortless lifestyle content that had defined her presence before. The shift was subtle enough that casual observers might not have clocked it. But anyone paying attention could see that the calculus had changed. The confidence had a different quality. More defended. More aware of the audience watching not just with admiration, but with evaluation. The It Ends With Us film itself occupies a strange space in the cultural conversation. It exists. It performed commercially. It told a story that genuinely mattered to many people. And it is now permanently inseparable from the off-screen drama that surrounded it, which means that every time someone discovers the film for the first time, every time it surfaces in an algorithm or gets recommended by a friend, they encounter not just the story Colleen Hoover wrote, but the entire apparatus of conflict and allegation that wrapped itself around the adaptation. That is not nothing. For a film whose entire purpose was to help people process experiences of abuse and survival, to have its reception permanently colored by a very public, very ugly power struggle. That's a particular kind of collateral damage that nobody involved can fully reckon with yet. Colleen Hoover herself stayed largely silent throughout the most intense phases of the public drama. And that silence, from the woman whose words started all of this, whose characters and whose story provided the canvas on which all of these very real human conflicts played out, felt like its own kind of commentary. Sometimes the most eloquent response to chaos is stillness. Liz Plank's aftermath is the chapter of this story that I think will have the longest tail. Not because her alleged role was the most significant. It arguably wasn't. But because the questions her involvement raised don't resolve when the legal case eventually concludes. The questions she raised are structural. What is the relationship between advocacy and power? When someone builds a platform around holding others accountable, what accountability structures exist for them? When feminist media infrastructure, or any ideological infrastructure, becomes large enough and connected enough to influence public narratives, who watches the Watchmen? These are not questions with easy answers. They're not questions designed to discredit the legitimate work of gender equity advocacy. They're questions that the most serious, most honest practitioners of that advocacy have to ask themselves if they want the work to remain credible over time. Liz Plank continued working. She continued writing and speaking. But the conversation around her work had a new layer of complexity that it hadn't had before. Some of her audience peeled away. Not dramatically, not with loud declarations, but in the quiet way that trust, once examined, sometimes doesn't survive examination. Others rallied around her more fiercely, seeing the scrutiny itself as a form of targeted silencing. Both of those reactions are human. Both of them make sense from inside the worldview that produces them. What's harder to dismiss is the underlying question that this story forced into the open, about all of us, not just the named individuals, about how we assign credibility, about how we decide who deserves the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't, about how much of our judgment is principled and how much of it is tribal, about whether we are actually committed to the values we perform, or whether those values are situational, available when they're convenient, negotiable when they're costly. That question doesn't go away when the trending topic does. It just waits quietly for the next story to force it back to the surface. Here's the thing about the silence that followed the explosion of this story. It wasn't emptiness. It was weight. The silence of Justin Baldoni in the months after the most intense phase of the public drama was the silence of someone rebuilding. Not performing rebuilding, actually doing it. Quietly. Without the audience that had briefly gathered around his pain, without the validation of a clean vindication, without the narrative closure that movies and television have trained us to expect from stories like this. Real life doesn't give you the scene where the truth is publicly acknowledged and the wrongdoer apologizes and the crowd cheers and the music swells. Real life gives you a Tuesday morning where you have to figure out what you're doing with the rest of your life and whether the things you believed in before the worst happened are still worth believing in now. The silence of Ryan Reynolds was the silence of someone recalibrating behind carefully maintained walls. Assessing, adjusting, the instinct for self-preservation that has made him one of the most successful personal brands in Hollywood does not switch off in a crisis. It intensifies. And so the silence was not absence. It was strategy, which is, in its own way, a form of honesty about who he is and how he operates. Whether you admire that or find it troubling is, I think, a reflection of what you value in people more broadly. The silence of Blake Lively was the silence of someone who has spent years mastering the art of controlling her own narrative, discovering, perhaps for the first time, the limits of that control. There is something almost poignant in that, in watching someone who is extraordinarily skilled at a particular kind of performance encounter a situation that the performance can't fully contain. And the silence of the industry, the hundreds of people who knew things, who had opinions, who made calculations about what it cost to speak and decided the cost was too high, is the silence that I find most telling of all. Because that silence tells you more about how Hollywood actually works than any legal document or viral clip or celebrity interview ever could. It tells you that power is not just what you do with it. Power is what other people choose not to do because of it. I've been thinking a lot in the process of putting this together about what the real cost of a story like this is. Not the financial cost, not the career cost, not the measurable, quantifiable, industry analyst-approved cost that shows up in brand valuations and box office projections. The human cost. Justin Baldoni's children grew up a little faster because of this story. They encountered something about the world, about how quickly a person's reputation can be targeted, about how institutions protect power, about how even people who claim to share your values can become adversaries, that children shouldn't have to encounter through their own parents' public humiliation. That's not something you recover from on a legal timeline. That lives in a family for years. Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively's children will grow up in the shadow of this story too. Not the same shadow, they occupy a very different position in it, but a shadow nonetheless. The knowledge that their parents' names are permanently associated with something contested and dark and legally unresolved. That the family brand their parents worked so hard to construct has a crack in it that no amount of charm or content or carefully managed public appearances will fully conceal. The readers, the real ones, the ones who loved Colleen Hoover's book because it helped them survive something, lost something too. Not everything, but something. The clean joy of a beloved story being brought to life was replaced by something murkier, more complicated, more exhausting to navigate. And all of us, everyone who participated in the conversation, who picked a side or refused to, who shared a clip or wrote a comment or just watched from the outside trying to figure out what was true, we all participated in something that had real consequences for real people. The internet loves a drama, loves the tension and the sides and the receipts and the takes. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend that this channel isn't part of that ecosystem, because it is. We cover these stories because they matter, because they reveal things about power and media and human nature that are worth examining. But I also think we owe it to ourselves, and to the people whose lives become our content, to hold the weight of that honestly. To remember that behind every trending topic is a person lying awake at 3 in the morning. To remember that the algorithm's appetite for conflict is not the same thing as justice. To remember that being certain, really loudly, performatively certain, about complicated situations involving people you've never met and information you've only partially received is a choice. And it has consequences that extend beyond your comment section. So here's where I land. After everything, I don't know with certainty what happened on the set of It Ends With Us. I don't know exactly what was said in those communications in their full context. I don't know where the line is between a legitimate PR response to a difficult situation and an alleged coordinated campaign to destroy someone's reputation. I don't know which version of Justin Baldoni is the true one, the authentic advocate or the difficult director, or most likely, some genuinely complicated combination of both. I don't know whether Ryan Reynolds acted out of calculated malice or protective instinct, or something in between. I don't know whether Liz Plank's alleged involvement represents ideological betrayal, or is itself being weaponized as a narrative. What I know is this. A man built something. People with more power allegedly tried to take it from him. He fought back in the only arena available to him. The fight became public. The public chose sides based on incomplete information, shaped by the very PR forces the fight was about. And now everyone is living inside a story that doesn't have a clean ending, and probably never will. What I know is that power does what power has always done. It protects itself. It shapes narratives. It makes the cost of opposition high enough that most people choose silence. And the people who refuse to choose silence, whatever you think of their character, whatever you believe about the specifics of their case, are taking a risk that most of us, sitting safely outside the situation, will never fully appreciate. What I know is that this story is not over. Legal cases have a way of producing new information at unexpected moments. People have a way of eventually saying things they've been holding back. The industry has a way of quietly rehabilitating people it publicly abandoned when the calculation shifts. And the internet has a way of returning to stories it thought it was finished with. So here is the question I want to leave you with. The one I genuinely want you to think about, not just react to, but actually think about. If it turned out definitively and provably that Justin Baldoni's account was entirely accurate, that a coordinated campaign was deliberately waged against him using the tools of feminist advocacy and celebrity PR power, Would that change the way you engage with celebrity media? Would it change who you extend the benefit of the doubt to? Would it change the speed at which you form opinions about public figures based on curated narratives? And if it turned out that his account was significantly exaggerated or wrong, that he was the difficult party, that the response to him was legitimate and proportionate, would that change anything? About how you evaluate men who use the language of vulnerability and accountability. About how you assess sincerity in public figures who have built brands around it. I'm asking because I think either answer is interesting. I think either answer tells us something true about this cultural moment and about what we're all navigating together inside it. And I genuinely want to know where you land. Drop it in the comments. Not the hot take. Not the one-liner. The actual thought. Where do you stand on this? Not on who's right or wrong necessarily, but on what this story reveals about how we consume celebrity drama, how we assign trust, and how much of what we think we know about public figures is something we were given versus something we actually figured out for ourselves. I read the comments on this channel. Not all of them, I won't lie to you, but more than you'd think. And the conversations that happen underneath videos like this one are sometimes the most honest, most genuinely thoughtful conversations happening anywhere on the internet. Because people come here to actually engage with something. And I want to hear from you. If this video made you think, share it. Not because the algorithm needs feeding, though it does, but because this conversation is worth having beyond this comment section. Send it to the friend who loves celebrity drama, but also loves to actually analyze it. Send it to the person in your life who has strong opinions about Ryan Reynolds and might benefit from having those opinions complicated a little. And if you're not subscribed yet, genuinely, what are you doing? We do this every week. We take stories that the internet consumes in hot takes and 15-second clips, and we sit inside them long enough to find the human stuff underneath the drama. The stuff that actually matters. The stuff that connects back to real questions about power and loyalty, and what it means to tell the truth in a world that doesn't always reward you for it. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Come back next week. Because next week's story? It makes this one look like a warm-up. And I promise you, you do not want to be the person who finds out about it 3 days late from someone else's channel. I'll see you there. Justin Baldoni is still building. Ryan Reynolds is still performing. Blake Lively is still managing. Liz Plank is still writing. The lawyers are still lawyering. The algorithm is still feeding. And somewhere, in a house that got quieter than it should have, in a family that absorbed more than it deserved, in a career that survived things it shouldn't have had to, a man is sitting with his kids and trying to explain something about the world that doesn't fully have an explanation yet. I hope he finds the right words. I hope we all do.